Signal.
Oh, we're good. Okay, wonderful. I'd like to welcome everybody to the January 16th meeting of the school committee. I'd like to open our meeting as a public hearing to review the FY19 annual budget. The superintendent will be presenting the information to us, and I would ask everyone to note your questions and save them for the end of his presentation. The school committee members can come back up to the table and answer questions with Superintendent Cosworth. So at this time, I will invite school committee members to take a seat in the audience. Do I need a motion to? Okay. Forgive me. May I have a motion to move into public hearing?
I'll second that.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you for help with that. And at this time, we'll go right into the presentation.
And with your permission, I'm going to ask Martin to come up and join me.
Of course.
I guess we'll stand up. Okay, thank you for coming this evening. This is the presentation of the 2018-19 budget. I have a PowerPoint for you that will take you through the budget and what drives the budget, and happy, as Melissa said, to take questions at the end. What we always begin with when we look at the budget is the enrollment. Enrollment drives the budget changes from year to year. In most of the slides that I'm providing data, I've tried to make it consistent from 2010, at least from 2010 through 2017-18. You'll see on this slide that we have a column for 2018 and 19. That is a projected number. That is not a hard number. We're not there yet. But that has been our typical growth. When you project enrollment for the public schools, it's always a bit of a challenge, and you can't simply roll the numbers forward so that kindergarten becomes the next year's first grade and first grade becomes second grade, because we have historically some grades at which that doesn't work. For example, ninth grade, we know that from one year to the next, we're going to have from 12 to 20 eighth graders coming in from the private schools. So there's always a bigger jump at that level. First grade is another larger entry because children come from private kindergartens into first grade in the Nantucket public schools. So it's a bit of an estimate, an educated estimate. You can see the changes over the last few years in the public schools, and what jumps out is the addition this year of the intermediate school, which breaks up NES to NES and NIS. So the overall numbers there are still quite high, but all of the schools are probably at or near what they were designed for. The high school now is the largest school in the district, and you can see that pretty quickly as you go through. This is an over 20-year look at the Nantucket public schools. I always find this to be an interesting slide. We live here, we've seen the changes in the community, but this really brings it home a little bit further. You can see that we've gone from 1,000 students in 1993-94 to over 1,600 today, and the largest growth has been in the last 10 years. We had gone down for several years from about 2007 to 2010. So I'm looking here where we went down from a high of 1308, 1295, 1278, 1233 before we started increasing again. And I think we all realized that that was tied to the recession at that time when people were moving off island. But if you look at the trend over 20 plus years, you'll see that anytime Nantucket, school population has gone down, it's bounced back by twofold every time. So it's sort of an interesting trend to watch. Demographics have shifted. And if you just follow any one grade diagonally, you'll see how that grade grew from one grade to the next. It's really pretty remarkable. So in 93, 94, we had 43 seniors, and our average senior classes are over 110 today. Pretty significant growth. This is the growth in the ELL population. I have 2010-11, which is when I arrived, but I thought it was also interesting to see 2005-6, where the total population in the Nantucket Public Schools of our English language learners was 33. And now we have individual schools that are over that, and the elementary school that is 3 times that. So we've gone in the last 7 years from 100 students to over 300 students. That's a pretty dramatic shift, requiring pretty dramatic interventions for the Nantucket Public Schools. This is the special education population over a number of years, and it's you won't see a straight line or even a typical curve on this. It goes up, down from year to year depending on the number of students being identified at particular levels. Typically, we identified more children in the elementary school years, and that number will go down as you go through the high school years. But you also have to remember that while this shows 71 at the high school, that's 71 of over 500, whereas this 46 is now 46 of 350 students. So your percentages changed. The budget development this year, this has the 2018 budget of over 27 million and the 2019 projected budget of 28,819. The projected increase is 1,333,000. However, 133,000 of that is for a one-time expense in technology, and we reviewed that with the school committee in an earlier presentation. This is the school committee operating budget over time. That's interesting to see, but I think this figure puts that in context a little bit better, because this is the per pupil expenditure for since 2007-8. And you can see that the per pupil expenditure was at a high in 2009-10, 22,458. It went down for a couple of years and has started to creep back up. Remember, that's tied to, per pupil expenditure is tied to enrollment. So when our numbers were decreasing, it was easier for our per pupil expenditure to be higher. Okay. Chapter 70, historical comparison. It's been increasing just slightly the last 3 years. And if you have questions, Martin will take those questions as we go further. This is federal grants. We shared this slide a couple of meetings ago, It shows the numbers in our Title I, which is remedial reading, the amounts in Title II, which is generally professional development. We use most of that money for our mentoring program that's required by the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Title III is the amount of money that we get from for our English language learners. It's based on the number of English language learners that we have in the district. So that number has actually been going up as our numbers in ELL have been going up. Those and the IDEA, which is our special education budget, are known as entitlement grants. We are, as a district, entitled to those funds. We still have to write a grant for it, but we know what that amount will be based on certain formula used by the Department of Education. The other type of grant is that aren't entitlement grants are competitive grants that we often seek, but those don't show up here. These are just the entitlement grants. IDEA is the special education funds that come into our district based on the numbers and needs of our special education population. And that has been increasing slightly over the last few years. This is just a percentage of the budget that is spent on payroll, over 80%, and those that go into expenses. That's been holding steady for probably the last 10 years, maybe longer. These are the percentages for each school and department. You can see NES is at 16% of the budget, NIS is 15%, the middle school 15%, and the high school at 20%. That would make sense based on the enrollment, the high school being the largest enrollment. Years past, the largest piece of the pie was NES. You had over 700 students in that building. And then central office, technology, our athletic budget, facilities are the other departments that make up the budget. This is the community school appropriation going back to 98. You will see that the appropriation is in red, and that is the amount of money that comes from the community for the appropriation. And that is outside of the appropriation that is given to the public schools. In addition, the community school receives gifts and donations. So this slide's a little bit different because one of the school committee members had asked to see what those donations were over the last few years. It's not that we didn't have donations and gifts here, but the records for that went back 6 years, so that's what we grabbed for tonight's presentation. And then what doesn't come from the appropriation or gifts, donations, and grants comes from participant fees in the community school. So their budget is, close over, I think, 1.4 million. So about $1 million of that is paid for through participant fees. And we always have that delicate balance of not wanting those participant fees to be so high that it precludes certain populations from participating in activities that we have. So it's important to have that appropriation. We had gone to a low in 2010 on the appropriation, under 200,000 to 400,000, and I think it's 450 for the coming year, for the 2018-19 budget. Special education residential tuitions. This might be a little bit of a confusing graph, but in 2010, we spent almost $1 million on residential placements for probably 10 or 11 students that we have to that we pay to go to special schools on the mainland. At that time, our appropriation was $478,000, and our circuit breaker was under $200,000. So that added together equaled under $700,000. We had to make up the difference that year of over $300,000 from the operating budget in order to pay for the tuition that we were responsible for. That money came from other parts in the budget that were designated for other things. And so I met that year with Glenn Field, and I said, Glenn, we've got to get that down to zero. We've got to be more honest in our budgeting, a little bit higher, and more aggressive in our efforts to obtain circuit breaker money. And we were able to do that. You can see the 2011-12, we were only trying to make up a little over $100,000. And since then, between what we've appropriated or budgeted and what circuit breaker brought in, we haven't had to take funds elsewhere in the budget to meet those residential. The other thing that we have done in this time over the last 5 or 6 years, and I'll certainly credit Nancy Miller with that, our Director of Special Services at the time, we were more aggressive in applying for circuit breaker funds, so those numbers went up. You don't always control that. And we were bringing more students back home. We were developing more programs in-house. And that's important when you're 30 miles out to sea. Most parents want as much as possible for their children to be educated on island. So we've probably added, I'd say, 3 or 4 programs in the last 5 or 6 years to be able to keep more of our children home. I should probably mention the Stabilization Fund here as well. One challenge in special education residential placements is that one student coming into your district that you hadn't planned for, let's say a student moves in from Connecticut and he or she is already in a placement, in a residential placement by their previous district. That residential placement could cost anywhere from $50,000 to over $200,000 a year for residential placements. If an expensive placement comes into your district from outside our state, we have to assume that cost, and we haven't budgeted for it. So you can see that that would hit our budget pretty hard if that happened. What New Hampshire has always allowed school districts to do is to develop a stabilization fund, rainy day fund, it's called a lot of different things, that allows you to go into that fund if an unanticipated residential placement moves into your district. Massachusetts is now going to allow us to do that. And so we have talked, Brian and Martin have been working, Brian Turbot, the town finance chief, and we intend to have an article on the floor, the warrant, for annual meeting that will allow us to put money that may be unspent at the end of the year into that stabilization fund. We would like to build that stabilization fund up to maybe $200,000. You don't want to put too much money into it. You can always add from year to year, but it will really protect our budget if something totally unanticipated happens. So each year, the school committee creates parameters for the administrative team. They provide us those parameters, and they guide us. They guide the building administrators as they develop their budgets with their school councils, and they guide the department heads as they develop their budgets for technology, facilities, what have you. We always link our budget needs to the district's strategic plan. We're always looking at the projected enrollment. We always ask building principals to identify essential services for their students. And we've been fortunate in the last 5 or 6 years to be adding programs and staff and resources to our buildings, to our building budgets, when a lot of people on mainland have not been doing the same. So I think we've been very fortunate, and we've been very fortunate maintaining our buildings with through capital funds as well. We want to make sure that expenditures over the last 3 years are what we're targeting. The school committee rightly has pushed us not to have as many line item transfers throughout the year, so that we're doing more accurate budgeting. Always at the end of the year you'll have transfers, but they shouldn't be starting in October, November, and December, which had been happening for a while. Utility expenses and was a concern expressed by the school committee. It's hard this year in particular when you're bringing a new building online and you really don't know what that propane is going to be until you've had that building open for a year, or what the electrical costs are going to be. So we have made some increases in our projections for utility, but we're still not 100% sure of what we will hit for benchmarks on that. And then more closely monitor the community school finances to reduce expenditures and raise revenues, to make sure that those programs don't run in a deficit. And Martin has done a good job with the coordinators of community school in ensuring that we're in a much more stable financial situation than we were this past year. So here are some of the things that we will accomplish with this budget. Class sizes will be maintained or improved. Right now, I think we're in pretty good shape across the elementary and middle school, but there are some areas that are challenging the principals. And Unified Arts at the middle school is one of those areas where we've had some large classes, and also some PE and Unified Arts at the high school. So we're trying to get those numbers down. Greater support for literacy instruction in grades K through 5, and I'll talk about that in a minute as I show some of the additions. We're expanding world languages in grades 3 through 12. We're adding a Spanish program beginning in the 3rd grade, which we're excited about. And that's not Spanish for Spanish speakers, that's Spanish for all children in those grades. And then we've also expanded the Chinese program in the middle school. We are adding a increasing staffing and support related services for students with special needs. I'll talk about that in a minute. We're adding another district-wide translator interpreter. We have had one for a number of years. If I took you back to that enrollment of ELL, and you'll see that we've tripled our numbers in that time. It only stands to reason that we need to increase the time of interpreter. We've also added a teacher to the intermediate school for ELL services, which helps somebody who's split between NES and NIS go totally back to NES, so supporting their services as well. And then increase staffing in physical education. These are the positions that we have added to the budget. The top two are filling out. We have a .8 preschool teacher in PE and a .8 teaching assistant that we're bringing to a 1.0 FTE, full-time equivalent. We are adding a new English language arts coach at the intermediate school, which will provide coaching in English language arts, and it will also allow NES to have somebody who's being split between NES and NIS full-time next year. So that will help literacy instruction in both of those schools. And I'm losing my voice. I mentioned that we're adding an ELL teacher at NIS. We're adding a 5th grade teacher at NIS. We have, 6 sections of 4th grade, and right now we presently have 5 teachers at 5th grade level. So those numbers are rolling up through that school. I mentioned adding to Spanish language at the intermediate school. That's actually going to from .2 to .4. We'll be adding another special ed teacher for the middle school. We have a group of students with very specific needs who are in a specialized program at NIS, and several of them are being promoted into the middle school level next year, necessitating that program be duplicated. Fortunately, we have the space, a room that was developed specifically for those children, so it'll be adding the teacher who is prepared to address their needs. I mentioned the phys ed program. We'll add that by .2. Chinese teacher at the middle school will allow some shared world language faculty to go to the high school. So that not only helps Peter and his school, it gives Yeping to John Bucky and to the high school, and also Chris Cothran in Latin. We're increasing the landscaping position by .2, so that's adding another section to landscaping at the high school and another section for the PE wellness program there. We are adding to the occupational therapist. A question came up at last meeting or the meeting before about whether we have adequate related services in special ed. Martin and I listened to that. We added some money back into the consultant line at the for special education, so that if they need to contract more time in OT, they can do that. We're also adding a speech language pathologist. We're excited about that, but this is one of the challenges. I'm announcing here that we're going to add this, but we have to find these certified people, and they're not plentiful. So what happens in a district like ours when you can't find them, that's when you need to go to organizations and contract for their services. Or sometimes we have had to fly them over daily or a couple times a week to be able to meet the services that we are required by the IEP to meet. And you can imagine that that becomes quite an expense. So we've reached the point where we've said, okay, we need a full-time. If we advertise for a half-time, they're not going to come here for a half-time position. And we need the related service, so that's a move that we made. We are adding a special education team chair. This is a position that we hope will support the special educators in our buildings, help run some of the more challenging team meetings, and monitor the services that are supposed to be provided for students. We would love to have two of these, one for the middle and high school and one for the elementary and primary school. And in our original requests, that's what we had. But financially, we couldn't quite make that happen. We're still committed to that path. When we get the opportunity to do that, we think that that's important to improve the services that we provide for these students and their families. I mentioned the interpreter translator. We have technology and repair. That's a technician in technology. We've added another building, and it's a lot for the existing technician to go back and forth between NES and NIS, because we've added a lot more one-to-one technology over the last 3 years. And then the hardware funding, I mentioned that is in the budget, but that is a one-time expense. That won't be a recurring expense when we roll the next year's budget forward. And then some increases in facility supplies and in utilities at NIS. Those are pretty much the increases that we are asking for encompassed in the budget. Now, for people that are here tonight, this is a little bit of a superficial look, but know that over the last 3 meetings, we have presented the detail of all of these budget requests to the school committee. They've had an opportunity to ask a lot of questions and drill down on some of those requests. So, Melissa, I think at this point I'd turn it over to you. And
I'll invite the committee to come back up to the table and then open the hearing.
we'll stay up here and
Thank you.
field any questions that people may have.
Fantastic. Thank you, Mr. Kozart and Martin, for a very succinct presentation. I'd like to open up the hearing for questions or comments from the public. I'm going to take 3 deep breaths and see if anyone has any burning questions that come. Jason. If you can ask them one at a time, that'd be even better, because then it will be really 2 questions. Sorry, Tracy, could you just stand up and say thank you? And to just let us know.
The spending for on-island therapy, that is included in per pupil expenditures.
Yes.
Yes. And the second question I have is, are we then losing, based on your presentation, are we losing Latin completely at CPS, or is that position going to be?
We are. We in talking with the administration, and I hope I'm okay speaking for you here, Peter, but Peter and John talked about Latin. We're going to move the whole program up to the high school. The numbers up there are are exciting, but a 0.8 doesn't work, and a 0.2 really doesn't work at CPS either, because it doesn't hit enough grade levels. And so I think we felt that it was better to have a 1.0 world language teacher, because that works into all the schedule needs, student schedule needs, and faculty schedule needs.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Okay, I would just like to make a comment, and thank you very much, Mr. Kozor, and to the entire administrative team. I think it's very important that we stay aware that the number of children that we serve not only increases, but their who they are, who their families are, and their makeups have changed significantly over not just 20 years, but even the past 9 years that I've been on this committee. This is my 9th and last budget hearing. Thank you. No, I've enjoyed every minute of it. But I think it's really important that as the community continues to plan for Nantucket, we continue to plan for the growing needs of our children, and how we're going to be flexible and meet the needs of every student in our care. And that means diversified learning opportunities for English language learners, our special education population, our brightest students and students. All of them have a variety of needs. And I think this budget is reflective of the needs of the students today. And I'm confident that if those needs change, we will change and adapt to meet those needs. Without any other, yes?
If I can just add, and you've seen this, but the public hasn't, we have 3 capital project requests.
Yes.
And I should probably just take you through that quickly. One request is for the Bacchus Lane playground and field improvements.
That can't come soon enough.
And this is Bacchus Lane headed towards the ice rink. We will be adding play area here for the NIS students. And we'll be moving the baseball field from where it is right now, which is behind the high school and not located in a particularly good spot, with lots of car
Traffic,
traffic and those sorts of things. So we're going to be moving that and creating parking over there. So we're very excited about that project, and it's an important project. The other is safety and security. This is looking from the front of the high school as you enter towards the main office, and we'll be creating a glassed-in vestibule that will provide security at the high school, much like we have at the intermediate school and now at CPS a year ago. So we're excited about that. And the other thing that we are doing, this is the old teen center where central office is located. And we have a plan to add offices in an L and a conference room. And the purpose of that is to open up NES, where several of these offices are now. The special education office, the conference room is over there. The ELL office is over there. So the plan is to bring them back to this building, which will open up the red cluster for universal preschool for 4-year-olds. And our goal is to bring universal preschool into the district in September of 2019. So it's coming up, and I'm excited and think that would be a wonderful thing for the community. So those are the 3 projects that we have given the capital. I don't know that all 3 are going to be funded. We haven't had an opportunity to speak further with Capcom, and so I'll maybe have a better idea. Well, I'm not even sure if it's after we meet with FinCom or later than that. But this presentation will be given to the Finance Committee on Thursday at 4 Fairgrounds, Thursday afternoon.
Perfect. Mr. Kozer, I'm sorry, there's one other question from the audience. Could you just answer it? Thank you so much.
In moving the special services office over there, would the new team chair and potential new team chair on top of that one in the future also be used into that special services office?
You know, that's a great question, Anthony. Personally, I would prefer if we can get two of them to have them out in the building. That would be my preference, and they wouldn't need a classroom. They'd need an office space. So I would be hopeful, and I think the level of service and the response time would be greater if they could be in the buildings.
Well, thank you again for a wonderful presentation. I'd like to have a motion to adjourn the public hearing and move into our regular meeting session.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you very much. With that, may I have an approval of our agenda for the January 16th meeting?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Great. Are there any comments from the public this evening? Mr. Dixon.
Hi there. Yesterday was Martin Luther King Day. And so I spent part of yesterday looking at how we have addressed the needs of our African American students. And folks, I gotta tell you, I mean, you've heard this from me before over the last 5 years, but things are really, really dire. We are performing abysmally when it comes to educating our African American students. We are now 50 years after Dr. King was assassinated. We're 64 years after Brown versus Board of Education, where the Supreme Court said separate and equal are actually separate and unequal, and it's unconstitutional. And so we, on Nantucket, among other places, we've brought everything together, and yet we fail miserably to educate our African American students on this island. I'll give you some data. You've heard me complain for 5 years about how we've been dealing with our students in the 4th grade.
Okay, Mr. Dixon, I'm just going to remind you that the public comment is really to be limited, so if you can give your data
Okay,
succinctly.
I'll give you my data.
Thank you.
Last year, there were 74 African American students in grades 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. 6 of them performed where they were meeting standards. 6 students were meeting standards in math. 0 were exceeding standards in math. Not only did 0 students in the black students in the 4th grade fail to meet standards, but 0 students also in the 5th grade, in the 7th grade, and the 8th grade failed to meet standards in math. We are so far off the curve when it comes to African American students in the state of Massachusetts. For example, 8% grades 3 through 8 met standards. In Boston, an inner city school district, 18%. In Brockton, 18%. In Fall River, 20%. Worcester, 24%. Lowell, 26%. And before, in the past, I've talked about some schools that do fantastic educating, not just African American students, but Hispanic students as well. And in many cases, these are impoverished students. These are economically disadvantaged students. And I'll give you some data on what some of
Okay, I'm hoping that, because we've had 4 minutes, just close it. Thank you.
Because I want you to know that the Brook Charter School Network last year, they had 536 African American students, and 65% met or exceeded standards, 9% exceeded standards. Benjamin Banneker Charter School, 63% in math, as Brooke was, it met or exceeded standards, compared to 8% for us. We are probably, there is not, in grades 3 through 8, when it comes to African American students in math, there is not a traditional public school system, and this is my final comment. There is not a single traditional public school system in the state of Massachusetts that has 50 or more African American students cumulatively in grades 3 through 8 that is doing worse than we are.
Thank you very much for your comment. Mr. Kozer, is there anything that you would like to address or would you like to save comments for a different time?
Happy Martin Luther King Day.
I don't think I will respond at this time.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll leave it to the committee if we would like to take up an agenda item addressing Mr. Dixon's comments at a different time. Thank you very much. There is another comment. I'm so sorry.
Comments.
Thank you, comment. Thank you. I'm sorry, Tracy.
Those of you that know me know that I'm reflective, and a year ago I decided as a parent in the district I needed to start attending school committee. So for the last year I've been a pretty regular attendee, and much of what I leave with you see leaves me frustrated. I am hopeful in many areas, but things that are frustrating to me are I'm happy to see a full board tonight. I have noticed over the last year that very rarely do we have a full board, which in a district that is growing like ours and with a board as small as ours, I think that makes a significant impact. And as people come up and decide not to run, and things come up in families, but it is disheartening when we very rarely have a board of 5, and it is noted. I am frustrated when we have staff and faculty present and talk about things that they've learned at conferences and brought back to schools, and whether it's intended or not, it seems to be a lack of vision or direction. Comments on presentations tend to be about the graphics and less about the content. That is disappointing as a parent in the district. I've sat through many meetings where focus is consistently on MCAS, yet when some of our principals have presented things and strategies and programming suggestions, not meeting the needs of the whole child comes up, but I'm not sure where that has been a consistent message. I'm frustrated that on what appears to be a lack of positive PR from the district via the school committee meeting, there's a quote out there that says, if we don't tell our own stories, somebody else will. And while I find it hopeful that there's been a push in individual buildings for social media coverage, I don't feel that our own board or district does a great job putting things in the Inky or on social media themselves. I think our school system is great. I think we have great teachers and great programming, and there's a lot to celebrate, but I don't feel like from a public relations standpoint that happens enough. There are things that I feel hopeful about that I've noticed over the last year. I'm hopeful of the reinstituted PD committee to better our effective teaching and learning strategies. I'm hopeful that when we talk about whole child, it's more than sports, like when the quiz bowl has been here for a couple times. But we need to push more in academics. At the end of the day, what do we need to know what's going on in the schools? It's always a sport report. I don't know what's going on in other schools and academic areas, and I think that needs to remain our focus. I'm hopeful that the strategic plan is being done, and that many of these are redone, and many of these areas are going to be addressed. I'm hopeful that social studies is already put on a future school committee agenda as we transition to new standards. I'm especially hopeful because we talk about our new science standards also at the same time being put on an agenda, yet they're almost 2 years old. So there's things that I am hopeful that as a board and as a district we're working on, but there's things that still frustrate me as a parent that I'm hoping in the future we'll be able to use things like the strategic plan and the professional development committee to steer towards better gains.
Thank you very much for your comments. Anybody else with a comment this evening? Fantastic. Thank you very much. We'll move right on to presentations and discussion of issues of interest to the committee. We'll invite the Director of Finance, Martin, back up to walk us through the second quarter budget presentation. There's a little seat right there for you.
Thank you. Good evening. So, for this quarter, usually we present the Nantucket Public Schools, the community school, and school lunch account. School lunch account numbers weren't available as of the end of December, so that will be presented in a future meeting, I believe on February 7th. The public schools, the budget so far this year is at 48% expanded, which compares to last year. At the same time, it was at 47. Expenses have increased by a little over $830,000. Payroll is very similar picture, expanded at 39% compared to 38 last year, and it has increased a little over $700,000. That is just the overall picture. I wanted to focus on several areas within the public school budget that we've been monitoring internally. One of them is the graduate study account. As you know, in the teacher's contract, there is a page after professional development that the district usually reimburses up to $3,600 of expenses per person for graduate level classes, which help them advance in the pay scale or earn professional development points towards achieving professional certification. Now, it doesn't help them get their initial license, it just helps them achieve the professional certification. And this year, that budget is slightly overspent as of today due to outstanding encumbrances by $1,740. It's been a year where a lot of professional development applications have been submitted, and even though the language in the teacher's contract speaks to that it may be capped at $50,000, it allows for more funds to be expended if it is deemed appropriate and approved. So that's one of the areas that I wanted to.
Martin, I'm
yes.
sorry. Could you speak a little louder? There's just some people in the back who can. The
Sorry.
microphones don't help. They're only for TV, so we have to use our big room voices, and the heat is on. So I had a hard time hearing you in the back of the room. Also, we'll try to enunciate and use booming voices.
Okay. No problem. And so the other areas, area that I want to point out where we are as of today is utilities and at the new intermediate school. As Mr. Kozart said, it's the first year of this building in operation, so we're closely monitoring where we are with, specifically with electricity and propane. And as of today, with all December bills paid, we are at 60% of those budgets expanded. So I will continue to update the board as we move along through the year. As Mr. Kozart mentioned, we have added funding for fiscal year 19, $15,000 to the electricity utility and $50,000 to propane. We think that should be sufficient, but that again is a forecast based on today's prices and the current environment. So we'll continue to monitor these as we go along throughout the year.
I'm just going to interject that the increases in the professional development course reimbursement line are due to the fact that we have brought a master's program on island, the Kathy Lee Bryan, and so we've had a lot of teachers access that, and that's wonderful.
Which was the goal.
Which was the goal. So that's why that we have expended more of those funds than we typically have at this time of year. So it's a good thing.
That's the areas I focused on and that I looked at with the public schools. If you reviewed the documents I sent and have any questions, or I can move to the community school.
Are there any questions for Martin on the second quarter update for the public schools? Okay, go right ahead. Thank you, Martin.
So the community school second quarter we're continuing to see positive trends on the revenue side. As you will see from the document I sent, it's increased by $83,000 revenues, a little over last year, which is a very positive trend. It is mostly driven to a little over $21,000 increase in adult ed revenues. Also, a total of 231 increase in the pool revolver. This includes memberships and the program income, all the revenue lines there. Also a $18,000 over 18,000 in extended day and a little over 11,000 in summer camp. So those are the main drivers for the increase in revenues. It's a positive trend. Cautiously optimistic at this stage is probably the word to use. We continue to monitor them as we go along, but it has been a year that specifically I want to highlight adult education programming has really taken off. The expenses for the second quarter are down, which was expected. They're down by a little over $35,000. And this is mostly due to a reduction in the outstanding encumbrances. As you remember, last year we had a rental expense associated with the outside offices, and that was $64,000 a year. So at this stage, we probably had half of this purchase order still open, and that's contributing. The other part is last year we purchased a new vehicle for the driver's ed program. $26,000. So this is what I focused on in this presentation for the community school. Again, it's we're taking it week by week, month by month, and so far it has been a good year.
Fantastic. Yes, thank you.
Just have a couple of questions on this document. Is this the appropriate time to ask?
Yeah.
Okay. So just
And I'm sorry, Pauline, just for the crowd, we're talking about the historical actuals comparison report.
comparison, right? So we have actuals from 2016 all the way through the budget of 2018. But just for my benefit, if you would, Martin, just so I can make sure I'm understanding this information correctly, that the FY 2018 actuals is year-to-date actuals compared to the last total, which is the FY 18 budget, right? So the actuals is the year-to-date money.
Yes, the FY 18 is what we've received or what we've expended as of the end of December 31st.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I just had a couple of numbers that I highlighted, if you wouldn't mind. Just the first one, the 26309, which is the salary permanent under adult education. If we look at the 2017 number, that actuals was 29,000. And year to date for this current year, we're 25,000, and we'd budgeted 27,000. So if I'm looking at this and thinking if we're halfway through the year, is there an expectation that we could double that number and go over the budget, or am I just...
At the time when the budget was created, the expectation was to apply that much expenses. Now, there is an offset as well. As you know, the salaries within the community school for several people are split between different revolvers because people are associated with different accounts and or different programs. So I believe that this budget, as you will see in the budget, $27,000 are budgeted in permanent and 32 in temporary. I believe that we will be within those two numbers, but when I spoke with Caitlin about it, because I did raise while she was still with the school, she said that they did budget temporary, but they've hired now, there is full-time people that are charged here, so the temporary line would not be needed. As you will see, it's only $7,000 used. So my expectation and Caitlin's expectation was when we spoke with her before she left that these two amounts of $59,000 will be sufficient to cover the salaries within the adult ed revolver.
Great, thank you. Another question going down to the contributions for the community use of schools. So again, it's the 26310 with the contribution line.
Yep.
25,000 is budgeted. There is nothing in that column, and I know that there are deposits that are made into other accounts. Could you just talk about because I know that's through the budget, the contributions.
The way the budgets work for the community school is revolving accounts. Obviously, what you're seeing here in the historical actuals, these are revolving accounts. They present all the operating revenues and expenses. All the contributions and gifts we record in separate accounts for transparency purposes and for reporting purposes. So the community school does have a general community school gift account, but it also have a specific early childhood account, adult education gift account, where all these gifts are posted in. And what I do at the end of the year is I apply applicable expenses that relate to these gifts, because the way they're written is the way we can expand them. We're guided by the donor's wish when they grant the funds to the community school. So I do journal entries. I transfer corresponding expenses that relate to the purpose of the gifts to these gift accounts. I know it sounds a little technical. It's just the way this way it's more transparent, because these are separate accounts that we create completely in the accounting system.
Okay.
The reason they show here in the contributions line is to balance the budget. Obviously, we will be transferring out expenses, but we cannot show that. We cannot show a negative expense line here. So we show the contribution line within the revolver, and then we take corresponding expenses and transfer them out. That way, the budget is leveled off. I don't understand. I don't know whether it makes sense. So. We show it here in the revolver,
Right.
but we record it in a separate account,
Right.
and then we transfer expenses.
Yep. I get it.
Yeah, so
It is complicated, but I
apologize
But I just think for anyone
for
looking
not
at this,
being.
it's good to know that they are coming in and that they're actually earmarked for a different account, and that you'll do the journal entry later. Because otherwise, as you'll see, we've got certain monies budgeted and zero amount. And I know you've already received some of those monies in already.
So far, just to update, $58,000 of donations have been
Great.
received
And
for
I
the community
remember
school.
being very impressed on how much community school was bringing in grants and I don't remember this, and I'm not expecting you necessarily to have an answer. This might be something for Jim Pignato, but again, under the community pool, the membership income, if you're looking at 2017 actuals, that total is just almost rounded up to $15,000, but for the 2018 budget, it's budgeted for $56,000, and I don't remember what was the plan in place to increase that line item.
It was a combination of increased rates for memberships and better recording and better. The expectations was increased participation, increased memberships, but also there was an increase in the fee for memberships.
Okay.
We hadn't increased the fees in 8 to 10 years. So a lot of that was an increase in fee.
And so probably the same answer for the program income under the 48400, because it's 34,000 encumbered from, not encumbered, actuals for 2017 was 32,000, but this year's 115,000. It's just a significant increase.
A lot of growth between now and the end of the fiscal year.
Yeah. And I know you're watching the numbers very carefully. It makes my heart race a little bit, because that's a significant income to go. I think that's it. That's all I had for this. Thank you, Martin.
Are there any other questions from the committee, including Natalie? Okay. Martin, thank you very much for your report. Thank you, Martin. Next is a discussion, new policy for our consideration, policy IMA, teaching activities and presentations. Our process is that the policy subcommittee, in reviewing our policy book with the superintendent, brings forward a draft of the policy for us to review and have a discussion about, and then it's brought forward at a subsequent meeting for a vote. I don't know if Zona or Jen would like to speak about the policy at all. I'll defer to you.
You gotta defer to me.
Yeah.
This particular one? Well, basically what we do, we're reviewing all the policies, as you all know, and we bring a few from time to time, and this is just an update. A new policy recommended by the Massachusetts, Association of School Committees, and we're just adopting this policy as far as we're concerned. and it's minor. I mean, it's just a general consensus. What happens a lot, and we can probably list on one hand. Every once in a while, Mass will introduce a policy that we don't feel too strongly about, and we'll take it and we'll customize it a little bit more to our district. This is not one of those cases. This is just a general discussion of presentations and teaching activities. So if you have any questions, feel free to throw them out there.
Any committee members have comments?
Just a question reading this. I just wonder how our principals will follow through or follow up on this. As I'm looking at this, it's stating that instructional staff will be expected to keep abreast of the new and promising instructional ideas and practices. So is that going to be part of their
Review.
evaluation, or how does that into place? I guess
That's our anticipation. That's the only way you can gauge something like that is you have it part of their evaluation. Each school, for the most part, has a format that they've set up and expectations they've set up for their staff, and we expect as a school committee that that's something they will carry through and document as part of their evaluation. Feel free to correct me.
I'm going to just jump in and say that this doesn't change an existing practice.
Right.
This just institutionalizes what is already happening. That we do have teachers staying abreast of new and promising instructional ideas. That is the whole idea behind all of the professional development that we do, whether it's in-house or sending people out to national conferences, which we try to do every year. So we just didn't have this particular policy as a written policy, but it certainly has been a practice.
Okay, thank you.
Any other comments or questions? Thank you. I suspect that this will be brought forward as an item to be voted on at the next meeting in February. Thank you. So we'll move on to committee discussions and votes to be taken. May I please have a motion to approve the school improvement plans which were presented November 7th, 2017. I imagine that's for all 4 schools, NES, NIS, CPS, and NHS.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? A vote to approve. May I have a motion to,
Actually, we're going to table B because we didn't get that back from the NTA
okay,
yet. So
great.
we'll
I
bring
was wondering, I didn't see
We'll
that.
bring that at some point
Great.
once we do.
Fantastic. So may I have a motion to approve a donation acceptance from Island Lumber Company to NHS gift account, specifically for the NHS High School wood shop of $200? Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? May I have a motion to approve the January 9th, 2018 meeting minutes?
So moved.
All in favor? Any opposed? Thank you. May I have a motion to approve our transfers and invoices? There are none. I didn't think I saw any, but excellent. I'm sharper than I give myself credit for. Mr. Kozort.
We're going to table the progress on school committee objectives.
Okay.
On the horizon, we're pretty much on track. As I mentioned earlier, on the 18th, Thursday, we'll be presenting the school budget to FinCom. And then on February 6th, we'll be presenting, Jean Witt will be talking about the changes in the social studies curriculum. The science, actually, we're going to push to February 20th.
Okay.
At the request of Michael Horton.
Great. I'm sorry, Mike.
No.
The presentation to FinCom on the 18th, is that 4 o'clock?
4:30.
4:30 at the 2 fairgrounds.
Four
fairgrounds.
Yeah.
4:30 in the community room?
Upstairs.
I don't know which room
Okay,
we've been
well-
assigned. My guess is last year it was
Okay,
downstairs, so
great. Well, there's always a handy sign when
Right.
we walk in the front door. So long as we're in the right building, we'll get there.
So the science will be on February 20th, along with the district report card. Also on February 6th, we'll have a vote to approve the budget that was presented tonight. Usually you leave some lag time to see if there is any input in that. So we're pretty much on schedule.
Great. For the, also on the horizon, I see the school committee self-evaluation. If I recall correctly, last year there were some comments from the committee that perhaps the form we had been using for, I want to say, eight or so years now, maybe 7, has grown a bit stale. And I wonder if we would like to have a couple people who were express that interest take a look at that and see if there's a way to improve the evaluation.
We
The
did.
policy subcommittee
You did? Oh,
Yes.
great. Thank you
Yes.
for reminding me. So we'll be getting a new form
Yes,
then.
you will.
And
No
then
evaluation.
we'll have that with the timetable to return, hopefully to Logan to help tabulate, and then we'll discuss it. Is that on the 20th?
I'm not sure
Okay.
if that will be on the 20th. Usually we get it out to you, then you get it back, and then we report at a subsequent meeting. So,
Okay.
Okay.
Great. Fantastic. Excellent. Thank you so much to Zona and Jen for taking that on. Are there any other subcommittee or work group liaison reports? Natalie, is there anything happening in your world you'd like to share?
Really, there hasn't been anything new with student council yet.
Okay.
Just from the last time.
Okay.
But
January is still young.
stay tuned.
Yeah, negotiations go on eternally and glacially.
Excellent. Okay.
And policies is continuing to meet. We meet again this week.
Wonderful. Have you gone into the J's yet? Have we gotten
we start with the J's on Thursday morning.
riveting?
Yes.
Okay. Well, any other comments from the committee? Wonderful. Thank you all for coming tonight. And may I have a motion to adjourn?
So
All in favor? Wonderful. Thank you.